Hello friends and welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. I'm really glad you're here. If you're new here, my name is Becca and this channel is all about my love for knitting, spinning, weaving, crocheting, sewing, all the fiber things. I invite you to grab whatever project you have on the go and join me. Let's make some stuff. I'm usually a one project at a time crafter. I like to start a project, see it all the way through to completion, and then once I've finished all the finishing touches, weaved in all the ends and blocked the project, only then do I want to cast on the next one. That's usually how I do it. I'm at least one type of craft, or one project from each type of craft at a time. So I might have a knitting project and a spinning project going. But it's pretty rare that I have more than 2 knitting projects going on at the same time. I don't know what happened exactly. I don't know if it's because of New Year's inspiration or how this happened, but I actually have 4 knitting projects on the needles right now. And I know for some of you, that's like how you roll. So, I know that a lot of people like to have multiple works in progress, so they can switch between them when they get bored with whatever, or whatever the mood strikes them. I just tend to not be that way. I tend to be more of a monogamous crafter, and it's a little bit, I don't know why I don't like to have too many works in progress going at the same time. I sort of feel like I'm not making much progress on any one of them, I guess, and I really like that feeling of finishing a project. So yeah, so now I have 4, and I wanted to share those with you today, sort of the state of where they are and how they came to be, how I got myself in this mess, and it's not really a mess, but how I got myself into this state of having multiple works in progress. All the works in progress going right now, all the knitting projects. So the first work in progress that you've seen before is the one ring scarf that I'm working on for our double knitting winter knit along. And here it is. I've got it rolled up so that this silk and wool tends to get a little fuzzy, so I don't want the end that I've done, months ago to be all fuzzed up and messed up, and then the final end be pristine because it hasn't had so much friction against it. So I've got it rolled up and protected, but as you can see, I'm well into the script section, and if you're interested in more information on how I'm working on this, I've got other videos that I'll put links to at the end of this video and also in the description, so you can go and check those out if you like. But as far as progress on this, the script part of my pattern is 8 full pages. And I am just about to finish the second page. So once I do that, then at the other end I'll be doing the door and tree as well. And then that will be the completion. So this is going to be a work in progress for some time. And I think that's probably why when I cast this on and I started working on it, knowing that this was going to be such a long-term project, I felt like I wanted something that was going to be more of a quick project. And also, because it's very intense knitting and I have to concentrate quite a lot, sometimes I need some more mindless knitting, especially over the holidays. I was going to have some times where I was with other people and wanted to be able to still have a conversation, but also do my knitting. And so I needed something that was conversation-friendly knitting. So that led me to my second work in progress, which is another pair of socks. These are, right now, 2 at a time, plain knitting toe-up in this wool yarn. It's called Stroll Tweed from Knit Picks in this color, which is called Barn Door Heather. I'm making a pattern from this book called Knitted Socks East and West by Judy Sumner, and the pattern is called Samurai. And the pattern itself is a cabled and sort of woven pattern, but only on the legs and cuffs. So right now I'm just doing the basic knitting of the toes and the foot and the heel, and then the actual interesting pattern will happen. So I'm about done with the foot, ready to start the heel in about, I don't know, ½ inch to an inch. And then maybe next time I'll have some more progress on this and be able to show you the interesting cabled section. So my second work in progress, Samurai Socks from Judy Sumner's book. In my last video, I told you about a new project that I have in the works, the Midnight Blue Shetland sweater spin that I'm working on. And while I was finishing up spinning that yarn and setting the twist so the yarn was drying, I was just itching to cast on a sweater, and so I did. This is a hand-spun project that I've had sort of in the planning for quite a long time. All of this is yarn that I spun that I've had in my stash, and I wanted to make this sort of turquoise to purple gradient sweater. And I've never really done that before, so I wasn't sure how it would turn out. The pattern that I'm using is just a top-down percentage sweater. So you take your measurements and then you do a percentage calculation. This is the same approach that I used on my Prairie Fire sweater, if you've seen that. So this is a top-down yoked sweater, and I've got all of these different colors of hand-spun yarn. They are all wool, but different breeds. Some of them I know, some of them I don't know. Like this deep turquoise is merino, but most of them are all I know is that they're wool. And they're spun on different wheels and different methods. This bright turquoise was spun on a Turkish spindle. And this sort of sea foamy green at the bottom that I'm working on now was actually some of the first yarn that I spun on one of my antique wheels, and it was before I sort of figured her out completely, and it's overspun, but I wanted to go ahead and use it anyway, and I think it's turning out pretty nicely. So after this sea foam, then we're going to get into some pinks and purple and sort of gray colors, leading into a dark purple at the bottom. So it should be a fairly quick sweater to make, except I actually had it all the way, the yoke completely done, ready to divide for the arms, last night when I realized that I forgot the last increase, and so it wasn't going to fit, and I had to pull back about 5 inches. But that's how knitting goes sometimes. So this should be a fairly quick project, and definitely stash busting, getting through a lot of the yarn that I had spun previously, and turning it into a useful and hopefully beautiful object. In my last video, I shared a new project that I have sort of in the planning phase, and this was a spin to knit full sweater project. And the project is a book that I wanted to make was a sweater from this book, Viking Patterns for Knitting by Elspeth Levold. The pattern that I'm going to be, or the sweater that I want to make, is this one called Ragna, which is a heavily cabled, sort of oversized sweater. And I wanted to start from wool and spin it for this particular sweater. And I don't typically do that. Usually my spinning is sort of a separate intellectual process from my knitting. I don't usually have a project in mind for the yarn that I spin, which means that I usually spin my standard 2-ply heavy sport weight, and then I get to mix and match. Well, this pattern called for a yarn that was heavier than I usually spin, and so I spun this Shetland wool in a 3-ply, and I really love the way it's turned out. It's so squishy and wonderful, and the color is just amazing, this deep midnight blue. So I took the yarn that was called for in the pattern, and I went and looked up the yarn weight and information about the yarn, found that it was 8 wraps per inch. So when you're doing spinning, that's a way that you can determine whether your yarn is going to be the same weight as another yarn, or to give you a sense of whether it's, you know, fingering weight or sport weight or worsted weight or bulky weight. The yarn wraps per inch, so how many times the yarn goes around 1 inch on a ruler, will tell you what the yarn weight is. So the yarn that was called for in the pattern, the information that I found said that it was 8 wraps per inch, and I was getting exactly 8 wraps per inch on my 3-ply, and I was really proud of that since this is not something I've tried to do before. So thought that was all going really well. I had 750 grams total of this wool, and this is where I wasn't sure doing a 3-ply whether that would be enough for a sweater. I didn't know how much this 3-ply was going to, you know, take up in the length. And it also turned out to be a bulky yarn. So 8 wraps per inch falls in the bulky yarn range. But when I went back to the pattern, the needle size that was called for and the gauge that was written seemed more like a worsted weight yarn, even though the yarn had said that it was 8 wraps per inch, or the information I found on Ravelry said that it was 8 wraps per inch. So the other thing that was potentially concerning is I measured out the total yardage that I had in my 3-ply, which was about 630, 635 yards. And the pattern called for 10 balls, which were 187 yards each, so that would be 1,870 yards, which meant that in terms of length, I only had about a third of the yardage that the pattern calls for. So, potential problems, and even though I love this yarn, it might not be the yarn that goes in this sweater. But there's only one thing to do for that, and that's swatch. So the first thing I wanted to do was swatch with the size of needles that they called for in the pattern. These are size 8 US, or 5 millimeter, to see what gauge I got given the needles that they asked for. And then also an 8 millimeter or size US 11, which would be a typical needle that you'd use for a bulky yarn at 8 wraps per inch, just to see what the fabric looks like with this yarn that I've made at that gauge. So I wanted to do a swatch with a couple of different sizes of needles to see where we're sitting. Am I getting anywhere close to the gauge with the yarn that I have? And would I be able to modify the pattern to use this yarn, or do I need to just get a different yarn to make that sweater? So let's go and do some swatching. finally today I wanted to share a couple of additional projects from my Knitted Kansas book that I'm working on, and hopefully these patterns will be posted soon on my Ravelry and my Etsy page. But these are two winter accessory projects that represent things that I just love about Kansas winters. And I'm wearing both of them. The first one is my Night Sky Wrap, which is a garter stitch beaded stole. And it is a very simple to knit project, but in this beautiful Malabrigo yarn. It's very squishy and wonderful, and there's some color variation in this sort of midnight blue shade. And there's something about the night sky when it's clear in the wintertime that's different than it is in the summertime. I don't know if it's the cold or the water vapor, the way that is in the sky, but the stars are just so sparkly in the wintertime when it's clear. And so that inspired me to make this pattern. The beads are all knitted in, and if you'd like me to make a tutorial on how to do knitting with beads, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to do that. But again, this is the Night Sky Wrap, and I hope to have this pattern up on my Ravelry and Etsy pages very soon. The second winter accessory project is these Ice Storm long gloves. And in Kansas, occasionally in the wintertime, we do have what's called an ice storm, which is where there's freezing rain and it comes down and freezes on all of the surfaces. And the trees, the next day, if the sun is out, everything is just glittering and beautiful. And it's definitely a very intense storm. Lots of times we have power outages and tree limbs down, and it can be very destructive, but the power of nature just is always amazing to me. So these are a stockinette glove knit in a sparkly acrylic yarn in this white, so that they will be easy to wash. But they have a lacing, ribbon lacing up the back, and I just thought that was a fun pattern to represent the beauty of nature in the ice storm. So once again, I hope that you will join us for the winter double knitting knit along, either with the one ring scarf or another double knitting project of your choice. That is it for this video. Thank you so much for spending some of your creative time with me. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!